Jolly good. Okay, so welcome everybody, and apologies, we've had some technical glitches this end. We seem to have got through them now. We're going to steam through the introduction here, because what we'd like to do is to get through to the guts of this conversation. So let me just go through a quick intro for you. The purpose of this workshop is it is a workshop, it's not a talk shop. We're trying to get through to how do we action some of the conversations around neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. And I think for most organizations we've spoken to in the last 6 months, what people are looking for is progress in some form, not perfection, because perfection seems sometimes out of reach. So what we are recommending to organizations is a point-to-point agenda so that we can understand where do you start and where do you end on this next 2024 plan. But if you're going to do that, what does that point-to-point agenda look like? And so in the course of this meeting, we're hoping with the experts we've got around the virtual table and the current table in here, we can work that out. So this event, hopefully, in a very short space of time, is about listening, sharing, taking those ideas and ideating, planning, and acting. Just to explain the agenda then, we'll go through a very quick introduction, and then we'll move on to 4 major topics: the priorities organizations see, the progress that they feel that they have made and where they are, the challenges of where they feel they are being held back, and the remedies and what we can do to move the agendas forward. In each one of those areas, really what we're looking at is a poll question to get feedback from the broader audience, and then we're going to have the panelists discuss each of those topics and share their experiences and ideas. And we're going to do our level best to get that right. And finally, as a quick wrap up, if we have time, and I hope we will, we'll get some questions and answers. So just to introduce the UWI, if people haven't come across the organisation, because it was only formed this year, we effectively are looking at universal workforce in a number of ways. First of all, in terms of its inclusivity. Secondly, in terms of the internal and external workforce and bringing those 2 areas together. Thirdly, looking at better work, but also looking at for organisations and workers a better work future. In terms of the role that we perform, there are 2 major things I think I'd like to point out about that. One is that we are really looking at using the power of the community to come up with the solutions and to understand the challenges, which is why we've got this type of call in the first place. And this is a social enterprise, so it isn't a not-for-profit, but any profits that come through the work that we do at UWI gets put back into the cause. And essentially that cause is to give people better work and to develop better work futures. In terms of the panel today, I think you're going to meet all these people as we're going around, but I'll just quickly overview the sort of people that we've got in the room and the virtual room. Myself and Erica, our role in all of this is to make conversation happen and to connect the seekers and the solvers in this marketplace. I'm also delighted to have Mike Clargo and Jonathan Pilgrim, both of whom I've known for many years. Jonathan, Mike, do you want to put your hands up so people can see you? There you go. And so these guys are both seasoned campaigners when it comes to making change happen, working for complex organizations, working to solve the challenges of change in organizations and dealing very much with the human aspects of change, recognizing that unless you fix the human in the room, any technology you buy is not really going to solve any problems. We've also got, I'm delighted to say, we've got Jodie Greer, we've got Ritu, both of whom are on the panel with experience of specific areas of transition for neurodiversity and also for disability. So we're delighted to have Jodie and Ritu on. Tanya and Nick are on the panel. Tanya and Nick have both got experiences, and Adam, sorry, I've got Adam in the room next to me here. And all 3 of these individuals are actually doing this. They work for organizations, or they've had experience of working with organizations that are effectively making that change happen and working towards a neuro-inclusive environment. So we're looking forward to their experiences and what they can tell us. Also on the call today, I've got James Lucia and Kalpesh Baxi. Kalpesh is in the room, James is in America. And James and Kalpesh have lived the total talent management story that's been going on for about 10 years now, with lots of people scratching their heads and saying, why do we still have an indirect workforce and a direct workforce working with separate systems, separate cultures, separate accountability and control? And how does neurodiversity feed into that total talent agenda? And last but not least is Rebecca. Rebecca's joining us. Hello, Rebecca, do you want to say hello? Rebecca's just written a book about the good culture. If you've not read it, you need to read it. It's an excellent book. And it's really looking at the organizational challenges of culture and how you address it and how you measure it. And Rebecca's got a real track record of experience of living this and working with it and making it happen for organizations. And again, with all of these individuals, I'm sure as we go through the panels, they will have an opportunity to contribute to the conversation, and welcome everybody onto the call. Just a bit of scene setting for you. If we look at the latest research from Gartner, we can see that HR as a function is stretched. It's already stretched before we had all of the challenges of the last 3 years. It's almost been a perpetual force majeure of challenges that HR's had to deal with. And that means that when you look at the actual initiatives placed on HR and what they're involved with, even if they're not directly doing all of it, it's an awful lot of work that they're having to take on. And of course, what we're asking them to do, of course, is take on this subject as well into that busy agenda. So for 2024, we're hoping that we can encourage HR leaders to take a bit of a step back and look at 3 big things. One is, how do they organize their functions? Secondly, how do they adapt the total talent or the people agenda of their organizations to make it a better fit for what's needed now? And thirdly, how do they tackle cultural health and make sure that they've got an organization fit for purpose when it comes to culture? So I'd say that of all of those topics that you saw with HR, maybe the big topic here is there's a fundamental job to be done here of maximizing value and performance of talent. If you summarized it all, I think most HR leaders would say that's the big job, and that envelopes everything else. But then if we say, well, if we can't actually just look at the crop that we produce, we need to look at the seed. We need to understand the soil and how do we build nutrients into the soil of the organization. And if we look at the outputs of what that soil produces, we're looking at the outputs of work and productivity. We're looking at the experiences that are fed to customers and stakeholders. We're looking at brand values, knowledge that's being developed, and innovation that's coming out of the organization. So there's a lot of outs that come out of this that are measurable in terms of work to be done. And also coming into this, we've got the need for top talent and the recognition of the importance of diversity to remove groupthink and to maximize the talent audience. So we talked about a point-to-point agenda. What does that look like? And how do we manage all of these things together? We've got all of the activities that need to happen to make this a successful culture, to make it a successful organization for people. And then we've got the journey that needs to take place. And for every organization that's on this call today, there's going to be a different start point and a different journey. So really for 2024, what we're encouraging organizations to do is to question, what is your start point and what is your journey going to look like? What's that next end point that you're trying to get to? And what do you need to do differently to make that happen? So during the course of these 4 questions, we're hoping we can provide some of those answers. And remember, Herman Cortez, when he landed in the New World, he burnt his ships to prevent any of his soldiers thinking they could go backwards. So if you're going to make one of these changes happen, it makes a lot of sense to do a lot of change at the same time. So the leadership and the people in the business never feel that they can go back. They're going to have to find a new future because there is no way back. So making a change agenda is normally always a better agenda with more than one thing to happen. So what are those things going to be? And we talked about total talent with Kalpesh and Jim on the call today. Of course, this is about unifying accountability and responsibility for the workforce, for the people. So if we're going to have a new organization for a universal workforce, what does that management actually look like? And how are we going to architect that in organizations? We know that we need to have an ops team. We know there needs to be a talent team. We know that there needs to be a change and agility team. And we know that there's going to be technology playing a major role in this. But what is that going to look like? And how are HR leaders shaping their organization with their DE&I counterparts to make sure that they are engineering this organizational structure and the culture to fit? That was a very quick introduction. I hope it was a useful introduction, because what we want to do now is to get on to the first question. And the first question is about priorities. And in the call today, I've got on this question, Jim, Jonathan, Kalpesh, and Mike Clargo. So we've got a question here, which is, what are the priorities that you see in your organization? You should be in a position on your LinkedIn there to choose which of those applies to your organization. So let me start. I'm going to start with Jonathan first, if you can hear me, Jonathan. When we're talking about this subject of neurodiversity, neuroinclusivity, it seems that most people feel that it starts with culture in their organization. You've dealt an awful lot with changing organizational culture in businesses. Do you think those organizations see culture change as a priority?
Not always, no. I think what we help them or want them to do is have clarity of what great looks like, what the vision is. And only when you've got that can you then work out what you haven't got at the moment. And often that is you haven't got the right culture to get there. So that the first thing really, from my point of view, is having real clarity as to what you're trying to achieve. Because great culture will be different in every different organization. It needs to be aligned to the vision. It needs to be aligned to the external brand as well.
Yep, understood. Yeah. And Mike, on this subject of culture, you spent a lot of time very recently, I think, spending an awful lot of time around culture and dynamics. Where do you see in terms of culture as a priority for organizations?
I think organizations struggle to grab hold of culture, not just in terms of trying to manage it, but really trying to understand it and the factors in it. I mean, they've all heard the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, although I totally agree with Jonathan. If you don't actually have a clear vision, nobody actually gets engaged with culture because they can't see the reason for it. It's almost, I mean, culture involves personal change, and you've got to be willing to engage with that because you're going to get the benefits out of it. But essentially, I think people pay more lip service to culture than anything else because they don't understand it. And one quote I've always treasured was an analysis of motivation, bearing in mind that culture is the sum of all the behaviors in an organization. And the lovely quote at the end of this 17-page article was, organizations get the behaviors they reward, which are very rarely those they desire.
Let me turn to Kalpesh with the same question. When it comes to the talent decision makers, Kalpesh, what are your thoughts about their awareness of culture being an important factor?
I think it's, this is about being honest and truthful in this group, as we talked about starting point. They're aware of it, they understand it, but we also, taking the point earlier on about you get the behaviours you reward. Yeah. If you're a hiring manager and you have a quota or you have a product that needs delivering, sometimes you have to forego the culture in their own head because the priority that they've been given by their boss or the organisation is just get this done.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when bad hires, bad behaviours, etc., come in. So I think, I talk about the shadow of the leader when we talk about culture. Right. So, it's got to be consistent. It's got to be how you talk about it. And, when you're going out to market and hiring, a glossy brochure won't tell anyone about the culture, the DNA, and what your organisation's about. It's how you go through that process and how you reinforce it.
Yeah, yeah. And Jonathan, just coming back to you on this, where we're talking about priorities in organisations, you have seen a lot of you've been involved in a lot of projects that have been around people and change in large organizations. What sort of awareness do people have at the outset of this about, as Mike was saying, what kind of culture needs to look like, what their objectivity is?
Yeah, great question. I think the whole communication of where are we going, what is the destination, what does success look like, and a subset of that is what is great culture, is something that is often very poorly communicated. The chief exec may have it in her head. If we're lucky, the whole of the top team will have it in their heads. But often when I first go and do a discovery phase on an organization, I will interview all the key stakeholders, and there is a lot of dissonance, there is a lot of lack of alignment, because these things are not communicated. And as the person said earlier, if you have a culture that requires these kind of behaviors, but you're not rewarding them, there's a real conflict. If people are being rewarded to I don't know, just increase revenue, but the culture is actually around inclusion and retention, there will always be that kind of conflict. So I think it comes down to communication.
So the progress question is asking really where people feel that they are with progress.
So let's take a look at some of these answers. Inclusive policy seems to be the leading answer, followed closely by inclusive recruitment, and constantly listening and learning to do better. I just want to begin with Ritu. So Ritu, I just wondered what your take was on the results that we've got here, perhaps when it comes to inclusive policy and your experience of the corporate world, and what you see the progress being in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So it was an interesting poll. So I just jotted it down. So you've got inclusive policies and then inclusive recruitment with listening third. That's interesting because usually I'd flip it the other way around. Actually, listening is the first thing that we do to understand what the workforce are saying, what they want, what they feel is lacking. And so, you know, when we work with organizations, often what we do is they don't have a view of their baseline. And when I say their baseline, they don't know what their neurodivergent workforce looks like. They don't know what support mechanisms those folks need. Managers are unaware of how to manage people in their teams that could be neurodivergent, as well as vendors and suppliers and other folks. So there's a huge amount of work to be done there. So for me, what we do is we go in and we'll work with the organization to establish their baseline, to establish where they are currently. And there's, you know, different methods of doing that. But for example, we're working with one organization at the moment. They're in the telecommunications industry. And we're doing a baseline audit of where they are. And the results are interesting because, of course, different departments and different functions will have different feedback on what's working for them and what's not working for them. So when you see that and you have that collective view, then you can start thinking about, okay, well, let's look at our policies, because this functional department over here is really saying that they don't find the policies clear, or that the format of the policies aren't clear. Because, of course, usually policies tend to be written documents, but we know neurodivergent people like to learn in different ways. So that, you know, should we be looking at video formats? Should we be looking at other types of formats? Then we can also look at things like how we identify the baseline. Identification. So how many people have actually come forward and said, yes, I'm neurodivergent, and identified that? Do we log it anywhere? Do we track it anywhere? Are we reporting on it anywhere? And actually, that's one of the other challenges we see, that even if an organization is trying to get people to come forward, they haven't built the psychological safety for people to come forward. People don't want it on their employee records, even though the employer has a legal obligation to support that individual. So there's a challenge and an issue around there. And again, when we're baselining, another thing that we see is more around that building psychological safety. How do we do it? Well, we need to establish terminology within an organization. What is the terminology we want to use? We need to establish, do we want neurodiverse networks, or do we want employee resource groups that can pull these people together to act as an advocacy group? So there's lots and lots of things, but I think it was interesting from the poll, because I from what I'm seeing, we wouldn't put policies or even the recruitment process first. We'd be putting the listening and establishing that baseline first. And in fact, recruitment, we put last, because how can you welcome ND people, neurodivergent people into your workforce if your internal house is not sorted?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ritu, for sharing that. Jodie, I suppose I'd like to ask you a very similar question. Is there something surprising about these results, and from your experience of disability inclusion as well, because neurodiversity or neurodivergent conditions come underneath that umbrella. What were your interpretations and thoughts on this results?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting because I actually find it very honest, because the reality is we operate in just the same way all abilities evidently do, because we look at what do people actually need and nothing about us without us, you know, let's talk to people. But the reality is every time I go into an organisation, the listening seems to have come later. And actually quite often they look at recruitment really early on, but then they're bringing people into an organisation that can't accommodate them. You know, they can't develop them, all of these things. So it's such a, you know, I like the honesty, and I think that the transparency is really helpful, but it's really important that we do start flipping it. And the other thing I'd say is more often than not, when I talk to organisations about neuroinclusion and they talk about recruitment, what they actually talk about is like one kind of specific demographic. You know, they're looking to recruit autistic people, or they're looking to recruit more people with dyslexia. Rather than holistic neuroinclusion, building that culture and building that belonging. So it is what I see, but we do need to start sort of flipping the narrative to start actually going in the right order.
Sure. And Rebecca, I'd like to ask from your perspective, what you think of these results in terms of people identifying what their problem is, because we've had discussions about organizations going, oh, I want to recruit neurodivergent talent, but actually the question is, okay, but what's the problem, and why are you having that problem? So I just wanted to get your perspective from that angle of, you know, where are we, and you know, deep diving into that a bit more.
Yeah, so what I've experienced, and it aligns so much with what Ritu and Jodie just said. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if people came to us with like the challenge statement of like, we would like to, you know, recruit and create an organization that includes a neurodiverse workforce, because we believe that will, you know, XYZ, like wouldn't that be amazing if that was the challenge statement that you know, organizations were coming to us with? Well, even this quick poll with this small, you know, sampling of people, it shows that like actually people are and it's probably because of that first slide that Ian talked about, like our HR departments and our organizations are completely overwhelmed. They are whack-a-moling their problems right now. They are, I don't know if that's an American reference, but that game whack-a-mole where the mole pops up and you're just hitting it. So what's happening is that they're coming from a risk standpoint. They're coming from a legal standpoint. They're worrying about, do we have everything in place in case something goes off the rails? Because that is the most urgent, most important thing on their agenda versus the most important thing from a, like, you know, what we should be solving for, right? And so so policies come up first, right? So you know, as my stint being internal HR, the very first things on my checklist were to make sure that all my policies were in place, make sure that I wasn't going to be, you know, basically sued for something because I didn't have the right policy and the right language in place, right? So again, we go back to that reward risk, you know, comment, like what are we focused on? Well, we're focused on that risk management, that making sure that, you know, versus like being forward thinking and thinking about what is actually really good for our organization, what aligns with our strategy, all the stuff that they were talking about being clear on what we're trying to even do here. So your question, Erica, is really it's kind of like profound in the sense of like we never stop and ask ourselves why before we kind of launch into these things. It's like we're doing it from some sort of reactive standpoint because we're overwhelmed. We're not taking the space to breathe and say, like, what are we trying to create here? Let's get aligned on that clarity. And then what are the next steps to do that, right? Which usually should start with listening versus just being reactive. So I just completely align with Rita and Jodie about we have to flip the order of what's happening, but I understand deeply why our HR departments are starting where they're starting.
Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. And Tanya, I just want to understand from your experience with the Neurodiverse Centre of Excellence, which areas do you think, since you've been with Ernst & Young, the progress has which of those areas were first priorities for Ernst & Young in kind of moving that progress along from where it started and where it is today?
Okay, so I'll start by saying I'm not in HR, I'm not in talent, and I'm not in DEI, because actually I think that makes a difference in terms of the action we've managed to drive in EY. We have been very proactive. Our problem statement was, we recognise there is a talent shortage in technology, and we know that technology jobs are growing from 1.5 million this year to 5 million in 10 years' time, and the traditional recruitment routes are not going to fill those vacancies. So how can we look at this from a non-traditional route and harness the power of neurodiversity in our organisation? And when we think about neuroinclusion, I think there's three distinct buckets that you can think about. There's the first, which is breaking down the barriers for individuals who are neurodivergent to enter an organisation, particularly a big organisation like EY, where when we recruit our graduates, we tend to look for well-rounded individuals that tick every box, and that instantly excludes many neurodivergent people. The second piece is, once we hire those people, how do we make sure that they get the extended support that they require within the organisation? And then I think the third piece is around, what about everybody else that's got through a traditional recruitment route? So I've got ADHD myself. I was hired through a traditional recruitment route. I do require some adjustments at work, not extensive compared to some of my team, but bearing that in mind. And I think when you start small and you bring in a group of people who do have some significant challenges, not everybody does, but some do, it's really, you have to learn quickly. You have to ask questions. You have to listen actively. Every single thing I do with my team, I test with my team. So that active listening, that building that psychological safety, both of those things are incredibly important. We've had a centre in the UK for 2 years now, 2 years in January. The ripple effect has been massive. Our community, our neurodiversity community, has gone from 150 people to 2,000 people in 2 years. Because we're talking about this, because our senior leadership team is sponsoring this, because there is more awareness around neurodiversity. And I think sometimes taking the first step, but taking it from a step of, as I said, that proactivity, that solving a business issue, gets slightly more buy-in than it simply being a tick box exercise that somebody thinks that they should be focused on.
Thank you for sharing, Tanya, and thank you to the rest of the panel for that. I think those are some really interesting results, actually. So shall we move on to the challenges? Okey-doke. So this question is, what factors are most effective in holding back neuroinclusivity progress? Couple of very interesting things there. So I think actually, once again, I'm going to come straight to you, Ritu, because the awareness and recognizing the value of neurodiversity is something that that you do a lot with abilities, with organizations. So I wondered if you could comment on perhaps why that seems to be such a high figure in this poll.
Yeah. So I mean, awareness, when we talk about awareness, we talk about education. And of course, here we're talking about awareness and recognizing the value. So I'm going to split those two topics. You know, education for us is a must. Everyone should be learning about this topic. Neurodiversity is not going anywhere. the diagnosis rates year on year are on the rise, right? So let's park that aside. Let's talk about the value of neurodivergent people in the workforce. So we know that neurodivergent people think differently, right? No matter whether we're looking at ADHD, dyslexia, autism, whatever we're looking at. And there's plenty of research out there to show some of those lateral thinking skills. We know that, for example, there's recent research around dyslexia being linked to creativity, right? And in fact, LinkedIn have put it as one of their skill sets now that you can even tick to say, yes, you're a dyslexic thinker. So we need to recognize that people's brains are wired differently. So when you say, well, how do we realize the value? You need to understand how they're wired. Because if you can understand how they're wired, then you can understand how to get the most out of them in terms of productivity, right? And if you can get the most out of them in productivity, that's when you can start measuring your baseline. So, one thing that we do, for example, at Abilities is we have a very bespoke assessment that we created with Durham University in their Department of Psychology and Neurodiversity. And it's exactly that. It's to understand how people think, but not just cognitive abilities, which is traditional psychometric tests. It's also looking at things like mental health. It's looking at behavior. It's looking at feelings and preferences. Because once you understand a holistic person, they could be someone who is super confident, super analytical, but actually they hate doing presentations. It gives them high anxiety and stress. And unless you know that, you might think, oh, that person's analytical and confident, let's put them in front of a room to do a presentation. So it's really looking at the individual, understanding how they're wired. And once you understand that, especially as a line manager, you can then align the tasks and activities for that individual to ensure you get the best out of them. But then the challenge is what was, I think, third on your list, which is around the measures. How do you measure that? And measuring productivity is, I think, a bigger challenge in fact, because everyone is so different. So how do you create baseline measures to ensure that you can say, okay, this team were tracking here, but now they're tracking here. I think to Tanya's point, I think earlier Tanya mentioned about EY recruit all rounders and you're diversifying that now. I think that's a really good point, because something that we advocate for is, if you interview 4 people, for example, and let's say person number 1 was a 7 out of 10, person 2 was 7 out of 10, person 3 was 7 out of 10 in terms of the skill set or the measures you're using to assess them against the job. But let's say person 4 was a 9 out of 10 for some bits and a 2 out of 10 for others. Actually, you need that person in your team, because it's those extra 2 points that are going to make that team more innovative and more creative. So again, it's about understanding the wiring of the person. So I think for us, it's the value is realized in really understanding the individuals and their strengths as well as their challenges, so you can align the workload according to how they're wired.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Ritu. And Adam, I'm going to come to you next. I'd like to get your perspective from an organisation like British Army. What kind of challenges do you see kind of being in the way of progress in that kind of institution?
It's really interesting. I agree with Ritu. I'm the defence lead for the dyslexia network across defence, because I'm dyslexic. I'm the father of 2 dyslexics, and I think the biggest barrier we have is that recognition of value, because you don't have a baseline, because it's only just changing now that I will say I'm a dyslexic. I'm transitioning to another career at the moment, and I'm really struggling to say, do I say I'm dyslexic? Do I not say I'm dyslexic? And this is very personal. I've been with executive search. They said, read your LinkedIn, there's too much dyslexia there. So I'm getting different feeds of whether I should put it on or whether I shouldn't. But more about the organisation. If you don't know how many people are dyslexic, if you don't recognise dyslexia, you don't see the benefits. And it's only now that people are sitting there going, and I've got someone who works for me at the moment who is that 9 out of 10 on 2 or 3 key analytical points, and is probably 2 out of 10 on confidence. But oh my, you want him sat at that table when you're doing analytical. I think I'm just starting to hear the discussion within the Army of that, because we do recruit all rounders. Confidence, the ability to stand on your feet, command and lead is in our DNA. But what we're also starting to understand is we have to manage our business, and we need these analysts. We need these people who are very, very good. I've written on a very bright young lady's report recently. She might be slightly awkward. If you sat in a meeting, she is the brightest in the room, regardless of rank. I've written that down because actually it's so powerful, but people do do not see that power. Therefore, they don't see the value. And that's why I would go down to executive buy-in and understanding and leadership. So, we've managed to get the head of HR for the civil service to stand up in one of our conferences and say, I'm dyslexic. It's almost been like it's quite bizarre. You have people in tears at some of our events where they're actually seeing there are other people within the organisation who have succeeded. And so that buy-in and recognise the value, to me, are those the top issues.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Tanya, I wondered from your experience as well, what your thoughts are on this. Is there anything that's surprising about these results? I know that executive buy-in is quite low and cost of change is quite low, but is there anything that surprises you about these results?
Picking up on the executive buy-in, I don't think you can change culture without having executive buy-in to do so. And ultimately, what we're doing here is we're asking people to think differently about neurodiversity. So understand what actually neurodiversity is. And it makes some people uncomfortable. It's like we've had people say, well, how do we talk about this? What's the language we're supposed to be using? So it's an area that can potentially scare people a little bit if it's new to them. And I definitely think one of the things that our leadership team has done really well is to immerse themselves in it and really try to understand it. So they gave us time on a leadership team meeting to come and talk to our UK leadership on what is neurodiversity, bring a couple of our technologists along to explain their experience of EY. And that is a really, really positive thing. Also, at the end of the day, my team wouldn't exist if our senior sponsor hadn't given us the investment to be able to do that. So I think that absolutely it should be a priority for people if you are looking at any sort of neurodiversity program, is getting those that ultimately hold the budget to be understanding and realizing the value of neurodiversity and why we need to harness this as an organization. And just very finally, there's a piece of research that came out recently that basically Generation Z, 50% self-identified or identified as neurodivergent. 20% of those were formally diagnosed, 30% self-identified. The reason why that's really important, this is the generation of the future that we need to be hiring. Those organisations that don't get on board with this and neurodiversity are going to start losing talent. So therefore, it's really important we're having these conversations with every layer of our organisation to make sure we can harness the power of that neurodivergent thinking.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Tanya. And Nick, I'd like to move over to you now. Aspiritech, from previous conversations that we've had, has roughly around 90 to 95% of its workforce self-identifying as neurodivergent. So I'm really interested to see your kind of thoughts, hear your thoughts on some of these results, and particularly kind of the lack of effective solutions, and from an organisation that was built with neurodivergent minds in mind. I'd love to see what your thoughts are on these poll results.
Absolutely. Addressing lack of effective solutions specifically, a lack of effective solutions is a mindset problem, not a solutions problem. The solutions exist. They are out there, and I promise you, coming from an organization that has the neurodiverse employee base that we do, that the solutions are much simpler than we can make them seem at times. And I also wanted to touch on, like Tanya did, about the executive buy-in and how that had a little bit of a lower amount of the results here. But I can assure you that the change is not going to happen unless the change is bought in at the highest level of your organization. You know, if your executive leadership team is not committed into making your organization a great place to work for neurodiverse talent, you're going to have someone in the middle there who is championing that cause, and they're getting pulled from one end. They're not getting support from the another. That person's going to burn out. That person is going to leave, and that person is going to go make great change at another organization. And you don't want to end up in that position, because neurodivergency and being supportive to your neurodiverse team members it's the way of the future in the workforce. You know, 20% of not you know, it's estimated 15 to 20% of everyone, of all adults, has some kind of neurodivergent trait. And when you're tailoring your organization specifically towards being good to someone who is neurodiverse, what we have learned at Aspiritech, that the changes we're making, it's not about being good to neurodiverse talent, neurodiverse people. It's about being good to people in general. It's about recognizing and appreciating the human experience in the steps that you are taking to support your people, whether it's during the interviewing process, whether it is during how you release and roll out new policies and procedures, whether it's something as, you know, simple as how you are structuring your one-on-ones, how you are delivering feedback. If you are going at that from the perspective of, how do I do this from a human-centric point of view, you're going to find a lot more success with your neurodivergent employees. And by a product of that, you're going to find a lot more success from your neurotypical employees. We have a very, you know, I'm going to say neuro-friendly interview process. And to share with this group here, the strongest feedback that I get from our interview process, which isn't anything that's, you know, crazy or breaking the mold in any ridiculous way, the strongest feedback that I get is from candidates who identify as neurotypical, who come and tell me, this was such an amazing interview experience. You know, I really, really enjoyed it. I wish more companies did this. So what I want to say is, you know, this buy-in from the top, the lack of effective solutions, the recognizing the value of neurodiversity. By doing this, you're going to be better to all of the talent in your organization, because even if you are tailoring these solutions towards a neurodiverse audience, you're going to find success, and sometimes even more success, with your neurotypical talent as a result of that.
Wonderful stuff. Thanks again, Nick, for sharing that with us. I think we can
move on. But I'd like to just pop back to Ritu for a moment, if I may, Ritu, because if we look at the first two answers there, which is about the awareness and then the executive buy-in, do you need to raise the awareness to get the executive buy-in? Are those two things, if you like, hermetically linked together?
So it's a really good question, actually. We have clients where we've had to do the executive buy-in first to get the budget to then do the raise awareness piece. But equally, we've also had clients where they've got some budget aside for kind of training activities and awareness pieces. So we've gone in doing the awareness, and actually by doing it that way, it then has a huge impact on a huge population within the workforce, who then come forward and say, yes, we're neurodivergent. So then we can start creating the business case the other way around. So we've seen it work both ways. I'd say probably the most successful way is actually doing some of the awareness pieces, because then you're getting that engagement from the workforce, you're getting that buy-in from the workforce, that creates part of your business case.
Yeah, and just one last one as well for Tanya. On the subject of this, you know, you obviously have a leadership team that's alert to this topic and has done something dramatic about the topic. What if you're in an organization that hasn't got that alert leadership team? What would you be thinking about how you would change the hearts and minds?
I think one of the things we're very aware of, talking to our clients about this, is there will be somebody in the organization in a leadership level that this touches, whether or not it is them themselves, they haven't disclosed, or they might have a child or a family member or somebody else who is neurodivergent. And it's often those people, if you can make them aware that this is a possibility and we can be talking about this more, that will help start that conversation. And then it's bringing in organisations that can help support those conversations going forward. So I think it is a challenge if you haven't got leaders who are willing to have the conversation. But I think as this becomes more of a priority for people, I think it is definitely something that's been spoken about more. It's definitely something organisations that we're talking to are definitely interested in. Yeah. I think it is something people are engaging with more going forward.
That's interesting because we've spoken to IBM and Deloitte, and both of those organisations have developed programs to encourage leaders to come out, as it were, and express their diversity
and champion
the cause in their organisation. So it's interesting that you say that. If I could just come back to Adam on that, what are your thoughts for the British Army on this one?
It's funny because I suppose my interest has been driven by my children. Then I was in Baghdad and I came back and someone talked to me about the Dyslexic Network. I said, well, I'm dyslexic, I'll join the Dyslexic Network. But what's really been interesting, suddenly, I'm a one-star general or something, we've got two-star generals saying, I'm dyslexic too. And all these people that I've worked with, all my peers, have been hiding it. And it's almost as simple. I have made my dyslexia at the bottom of my signature block. That generates so much interest. And people come to me. I've had people with autism come to me because I am actually saying I am dyslexic. On my LinkedIn, it's dyslexic. And, you know, I create that safe space so people can come to me and say, and suddenly the conversation is growing. The network's been going for a year and a half. We've got 2,000 members of the network. And that is just growing and growing and growing. And so, to me, executive buy-in, however you get it, now that could be legal compliance, that could be moral, that could be personal experience, that could be a spare bit of money, and let's come up with a training program that, you know, there are many ways of doing it. But getting that executive buy-in, because I guarantee someone on every board in every FTSE top 100 is going to be neurodivergent. And it's about creating that safe space, even someone for senior, because I would never have written on my signature block in the last I've been in the army 30 years. It is only now would I add it on. So I would guarantee most FTSE 100 colleagues have someone on their board. They've got a 20-member board, someone who's neurodivergent. It's about opening that up and starting the conversation.
Yeah, and Rebecca, I've not got you on this list for this particular question, but that conversation about safe space is quite interesting to me because I think, you know, when you're doing culture change, building the safe space is key, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100%. I love this leaning into, I mean, the safe space and what I think everybody is saying here is you're creating a space in which people can feel vulnerable and actually talk about what makes them different, which what we all agree is actually what makes them special and valuable and brings, you know, their special mix to the table. So the way into creating that, I mean, we could have a whole separate webinar on just like how do you create a psychologically safe team and space and whatnot. But I'll just say that it starts with vulnerability from leadership, right? Like they need to be able to share and say, you know, what's authentic about them, whatever it is, and that invites, you know, others, whether it's their peers on the executive team or, you know, those that are, you know, the staff and the employees in the organization. So it starts with vulnerability. And I think all those examples were about somebody putting their hand up and saying like, I'm going to open this conversation by being vulnerable and talking about these things, which might be uncomfortable for others. And I'm going to invite that conversation, and it starts there.
I'm terribly sorry for pulling this thread because it has been quite interesting, I think, as a discussion topic. But if Mike's still on the call, and I hope Mike is, Mike, I know that you've been doing a lot of work around this kind of safe space of culture to build culture. Do you want to say something about that?
And I think it's a lot wider than that. I mean, neurodiversity for me would include those people who have had basically mental health issues as well, and I really like the view that's been expressed about the fact that when you make a culture more accepting of neurodiverse people, you also make it accepting of neurotypical people. And I've been, aside from the structure side of things, which is where I try and help clients think through what it is that creates stress on people in the way they've structured things versus those things that draw them out positively. I've been involved in a group called Kintsugi Hope, and I joined it to try and run something. And I've never seen myself as being somebody who's ever had any mental issues. But I went through the training first, and I'm there in listening to the conversations, and they start talking about depression and they start talking about anxiety. My first response is, well, I've never had anxiety. I've never had depression. And blow me down, as people talk about it, you suddenly realize you have. And when you embrace the fact that you have, all of a sudden it opens up a whole load of new things. It's almost like your brain springs out of it and actually enables you to be a richer, more diverse person yourself. And so I think I love this topic. I love what I've heard. I've heard lots of new things. But yes, I believe this whole thing. We need to make business cultures, particularly as change increases, as AI comes in, as all of those things, people's work is going to be more and more about change and other people. It's the relationships that we'll have to focus on, because a lot of the routine will be taken out into basically automation, which is where it should be in many cases. But everything's going to be changing so fast, and we need to learn from each other about how we create an environment that's a lot more supportive of people within that space. And I think the initiative you kicked off here probably has just listening to it has a lot more in it than I'd realized.
So on the remedies question, really what we're asking is, okay, there are lots of solutions out there. I think what we heard in the previous responses, the feeling is that actually there's probably enough solutions out there, but which of the solutions is in need? What type of solution are we talking about? So I'm going to go straight to Kalpesh actually on this, Kalpesh, because when I'm looking at the kind of remedies side of things, you've been in the technology and sort of talent space in this area. So do you think the solutions are out there, and is that kind of poll response what you were expecting?
The answer is no. I'll start off with a poll because it's quite surprising. So I think if we talk about solutions, I'm going to put technology to one side at the moment, because I think as society, we have a problem at the moment where everything goes to what is a tech fix, not what is the solution. So let's keep that one side. We kind of get there over. If we just look at, I've been truly inspired. I've been doing recruitment stuff for 26 years, and hearing Tanya's story and what Ritu's done and what Rebecca's done with our organisation, what Adam's been through with probably the most institutionalised organisation in the country, right? And the Army's now coming on to understand it. There are lots of solutions out there. The challenge really has to be what is right for your organisation. And I'm actually genuinely surprised this didn't come up on the remedies, but and bearing in mind I'm a talent person, so for me it's about I should be going to CVs and interview processes and technology. I'd actually say your starting point is finding your maturity jump-off point, because every organisation's at a different point. And I'm sure if we all talked about, from here today and say, where are you on your maturity curve, we'd probably have a whole spectrum of answers that comes through. So I think very much, look, there are solutions out there. I think that there's a point that actually you need to know what solution is right for your organisation. What are you ready for? Not every organisation is ready for an EY solution or a British Army solution. And actually, I think you're missing one remedy, if I'm honest.
Go on then.
It was all what question 3 was all about, the executive buy-in. Before you do anything, you have to have that executive buy-in, right? You need that chief sponsor who's going to drive the agenda through to say it is okay for this to be okay in our organisation.
And it sounds as though to get that executive sponsor, it's about encouraging people to expose themselves and express where they are.
Yeah, and I think that if there's, you know, if I talk about what COVID has done, it's probably created acceptance about vulnerability in organisation more. You know, we talk about the vulnerable leaders, show authenticity. You know, so we're now starting to see more and more leaders going, look, it's not me, it's because of this. And look, you know, my involvement with UWI came off from you and I having a conversation with a mutual person.
Yeah.
And we both, you know, this individual was like, you two should talk.
Yeah.
You know, because you're both coming at this problem from different directions. So I think, look, finding that maturity jump on point is key. I'm not the right person to tell organisations how to do that. There's more experienced people on this solution session, but that executive buy-in comes in next. Then worry about how do you replace CVs. Then worry about how you replace assessments and everything else that comes after that.
Rebecca, I'm coming to you on this in terms of the kind of remedy conversation. You've been doing sort of culture change stuff for a while. Is there a shortage of solutions, or is it a way people are looking at the issues? What is it?
Oh gosh, no, I completely agree with what Kalpesh just said. It's first you have to get clear on your aspirations. I go back to like what Jonathan said at the top of the call. Like if we're not clear on what we're actually trying to do here, first and foremost, and then back to what you just said, Ian, about like, and then getting that executive buy-in that we've been talking about, like we have to start there. We have to actually understand like what's our future state that we're looking, what's our aspiration? Because then the route to get there can look very different. And that route to get there actually depends on the culture that you aspire to become, right? Like, so you can, and even that, like you could say, your kind of aspiration statement for one organization to another organization could look very similar, but based on your culture and based on kind of the behaviors and the norms that you aspire to have, like, again, those solutions could look very different, right? Like, because the way that you do the work is what informs your culture, right? So it's just, it's what we want to do as humans. We want to jump to the solutions and say like, oh, here's the problem, that I've got a solution. And what Kalpesh was saying is about like, can we just put the tech aside for a second? Because I mean, I lived in Silicon Valley. Like this is like, everything is about like, I have this tech, where can I plug it in to solve your problems, right? Like it is, and it's back to the why, like why are we doing that? So I love all these like suggestions, and I think they should be in the hopper. And it's like, okay, but like first let's get clear, what are we trying to do here and why? And then do we have that sponsorship? And then we can figure out the what to make it happen, because it's a lot easier to do it that way. It really is. Like the what becomes, the remedies become very clear once you have actually gone through that work to get that clarity around what we're trying to do and why. So
Tanya, I've not got you in this space, but I'm going to cheat as usual and ask you a question, because we were talking about this kind of point-to-point. Are some organisations overbiting, do you think, in terms of their aspirations and then not getting anywhere? What's your thoughts around this?
I think this absolutely needs to be looked at holistically, and you need to decide where you're starting. So many organisations might try and fix the recruitment process and then not fix the internal extended support piece. And you have got to do all of it. So I was talking to somebody the other day who had just done some research on the amount of people that were happy, that had gone through autism at work programs, and the amount of people that are unhappy once they're joined organisations was incredibly high. And so if an organisation is thinking about this, they need to think about each stage. It's like it's not a case of what does the not just what the recruitment process looks like, how do you onboard the person into the organization? How do you make sure that they're getting the information that they need in order to feel settled? How do you understand the strengths of the individual, but also understand the challenges, and therefore you get the right adjustments around that individual? How do you make sure that the line manager is aware of both the strengths, so they can be resourced on projects that they enjoy, but also the challenges, so that they can feel supported on that? And then how do you think about progression and promotion for these individuals as well? So I think you have got to think about it all. You can't just think about one thing and tick a box and say, right, that's it. We've got neuroinclusion sorted because we've offered somebody a piece of technology, or we've changed our recruitment process. So unfortunately, I don't think it's a case of going, you need to start here. You need to look at all of them.
Yeah, and Jonathan, if you're still on the call, I hope you are, because I can't see you in front of me, but you've dealt with complex change programs before. It seems that this is quite a complex change program. Is there a risk that people just find it too overwhelming?
I think you can make it very complex, but I think if you have, as Rebecca was saying, if you have clarity of your vision, I did the army. I used to be in the army, and we used to have a mnemonic there that I was kept with me for the last 30 years. It's called KISS. You know, keep it simple, stupid. And the more simple that you can keep things, the easier it will be to implement things. So I think so long as you've got good clarity and you keep it simple and you know why you're going in a particular direction, you'll be okay. I think going again back to what Rebecca said, if you start, and with Kalpesh, if you start with just the solutions and try and put them together like little jigsaw pieces, you'll probably never end up with a completed jigsaw.
Yeah, great. And Nick, coming to you on this one, with regards to the success you've made with Aspiritech, is that part of your success, is the fact that you just had a kind of a clear plan, and actually you weren't looking around for remedies?
I wouldn't say that part of our success is having a clear plan. Of course we have one, and that contributes to the success. But I will say our commitment to communication and feedback is what makes us so successful as an organization and enables us to exist with an employee base that is, over 90% neurodiverse. We employ autistic adults specifically in the technology space. So when we make a change, when we look to do something, we don't assume that we have the best solution, that we have the answer that is going to work the best for our team members. I am a neurodiverse adult, and I don't use that as a point of authority, as a member of the executive team, and say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to connect better and make it a better workplace for our team members. We leverage, I don't like using that word, but we leverage the employee voice and get the feedback and say, this is what we want to do. And you take it piece by piece. I want to make my recruitment process more neurodiverse friendly. All right, let's put a group together. Let's get the voices of our neurodiverse team members, and let's do something that is going to be neurodiverse friendly from the feedback we're getting from a larger neurodiverse group, and put that into place. Now let's do that for another area of the organization, And by doing that, your employee base is seeing that you are making an honest commitment to making change. Not just making change to say, I'm a neuro-friendly employer, look at these great things I'm doing. It is, I am making change that is going to specifically and significantly impact my employee base, because that is the people who I am using to lead this charge. I'm making change that I'm being told is going to be impactful by my employees. I'm not telling my employees this change is going to be impactful. They are telling me this change is going to be impactful. And I think that is where we find our success as an organization.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Nick. Jodie, just a thought from you on this, because I think what I've heard in the call is that really, if you've got, if you're finding out the role models and you can kind of build the sponsorship, develop this safe space, you could set a baseline, you can know where you're going. That seems to be the kind of direction of travel that the conversation's going on in the call here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what's been said has really resonated. But absolutely, we have to have, why would someone share if they feel like there's going to be some sort of stigma or it's going to stand in the way of their progress and so on? So we have to have these safe spaces. And so, I mean, I harp on about culture all the time, but it's so, so important. And that has to be one of the kicking off points. And something I just want to share as well, going back to what Kalpesh kicked off with, and I know you're aware of this, Ian, but at Be People Smart, we do have a disability inclusion maturity model. We're not selling, it's free, completely free. But I wanted everyone to know on the call, because it's granular, it's totally different to anything out there, because it gives you that chance for you to self-assess and you to identify where you want to get to. Even the guidance tells you, don't get hung up on benchmarking against your peers, find your way, because we're all going to progress in different directions with different priorities. And I would really recommend anyone take a look if they want to build on this, because that includes neuroinclusion and accessibility within it. But definitely people need to work out, where are they? Where do they want to get to? What's their initial priorities? And where are the gaps? How are they going to achieve them? And having some help to get there is definitely going to be a kickstart.
Great stuff. And Rita, I'll give you an opportunity to come back on this as well, because you also have a maturity model, don't you?
Yeah, we do indeed. So we measure against, set categories, and we work very closely, as I mentioned before, with Durham around that, because they've done a piece of research. And yeah, what we're finding is it's a good indicator when you do a self-assessment, but it's not the be all and end all, because you're only getting one person's perspective, and that's the person filling in the assessment. So, for us, it's a good indicator, but what's really important is really to listen to the workforce, which, going back to the beginning point, that's where it comes from. Like, what are people saying? What do they feel they need support in? What do they feel they need to be more productive in their jobs?
So one of the things that we are looking at with the UWI is what we call this, the UWI model, which is looking at sort of 5 key areas of this topic. Because what we're finding is that there's quite a big agenda on all 5 spaces. And I think it was interesting from listening to Tanya that, again, shaping the framework of a program is important to include all of the building blocks. But at the same time, I think from what I've learned from Tanya is that the point-to-point baseline doesn't necessarily need to be a complete solution for everything. It could be effectively a small model that's actually rolling out and scaling after that. But again, we've also heard that the intent and the budget is going to be a big thing. But to get to that, perhaps we need to have more education, a safer space, and some good baseline. In terms of the baseline credentials, we put a very simple, straightforward baselining platform onto the UWI website, which is also free. What I do expect is that it's a starting point for people to have the conversations internally. What I would say is I think the work that Ritu and Jodie have done is excellent as well. And I know that Mike, you've also got a maturity model kind of framework that you've been working on with culturistics. So what I would say is that for organizations considering where they start, do check it through the community that we've got and connect to these people. Because I think depending on your need, there is going to be some maturity modeling out there that you can adopt. So what we've got in the baselining credentials, we've got a maturity model. What we're also doing next year is we're launching the 5 Smiles cultural health rating. So what we will be doing is giving candidates and prospective employees the opportunity to take a measure of the organisation they're going to be working towards. I think that's the first time that there has been some sort of a measure for people looking for a job of the organisations that they're moving into. It remains to be seen how well that goes next year, but it's going to be an interesting experiment at least to find out what feedback we get from establishing a model that people can use to self-assess their organizational health. Just to say, in terms of the information that we're going to provide with the materials today, we've put together a simple marketplace of all of the solutions that the UWI is coming across at the moment. That includes contributions from the team here. And we've also got bios of all the people that you've heard from on the call, so that you could reach out to those people individually if you wish and get in contact. And so a few of the bits and pieces with the UWI activity, we've now created the hub, which is the community space. If you become a friend of the UWI, which is free, it's free to join the hub and to join the conversation. If you want to become a member, that's also good, and you get all of the toys and resources that we're putting together. If you'd like to check your 5 smiles, we've got an online accreditation so you can self-assess and see how you're doing so far. If you'd like to apply to become a fellow, like some of the boys and girls in the room here, then do get in touch with us. We have a series of events going on next year. It looks as though one of those is going to be about safe spaces by the looks of things. And if you'd like to be a speaker at those events, then do let us know. The big event that we've got next year is in October, which is going to be the European Summit for this region. So we're looking forward to telling you more about that. If you have articles to write, then again, please share them on the hub. And if you'd like to become a sponsor of the UWI or the events that we're running, then let us know.
Just one more thing, actually, that is on that list. We are currently working with a number of organisations on partnered events and joint events. So please reach out if you are interested in partnering with the UWI in running some events, perhaps that work alongside your agenda for your suppliers or partners around the topic of the universal workforce.
Thank you, everybody on the panel and participating on the polls for today for your perspectives. We will be sharing all of the video content and all of the polls with everybody on the meeting here today. We hope you will find that useful. If you've got any other questions that follow from this that you think about on the car on the way home, if you're actually not at your home office, then do reach out to us and ask the questions, and we'll look for the appropriate fellows and sponsors to respond to them. But on that, I think on behalf of Erica and myself, thanks everybody for coming, and we look forward to talking to you at another event soon.